Has someone ever tried to make you feel guilty for choosing yourself?
When my little sister Maya stood up during my engagement toast, holding up a blurry black and white sonogram like it was some damn Olympic medal, and said loud enough for the whole restaurant to hear, "Looks like I win again," the room erupted into applause, cheers, claps, even some teary-eyed chuckles, and I just stood there, champagne flute halfway to my lips, frozen in that absurd second like the butt of a joke I didn't know I was part of. My fiancé Jake's hand dropped from my waist. My mother gasped like Maya had just announced world peace, and someone, probably my Aunt Connie, the eternal hype woman, whispered, "God, she's glowing." While everyone turned to the younger golden child of the family, like she was a damn goddess descending from heaven with a fetus-shaped halo. Except me. I didn't clap. I didn't smile. I just stared at her, watched her smug little half-smile tighten as she met my eyes, and in that exact moment, standing there in my cream silk dress, the one Maya said looked mature, but not in a good way. I didn't feel hurt, or jealous, or even surprised. I felt still. And in that stillness, in the quiet that somehow kept thundering behind my ribcage while the people closest to me treated my engagement like the pregame to Maya's new chapter, I made a choice that would set everything in motion. I didn't say a word that night, not one single syllable. But I went home, sat down at my laptop with my hair still pinned and makeup still perfect, poured myself a glass of Jake's whiskey, and started planning something that would make sure Maya never forgot that night. But let me back up for a second, because I don't want you to think this was some one-time misstep. That Maya got caught up in her own joy and just accidentally stole my thunder. No, that would have been forgivable. What happened that night wasn't just Maya being selfish, it was Maya being Maya, the version of herself she's honed and polished since we were little girls. The one our family coddled and cheered for so long that somewhere along the line, she started believing she was entitled to every spotlight, every compliment, every ounce of attention in the damn room, no matter whose night it actually was. Maya is 2 years younger than me, though you'd never know it by the way she commands a space. From the moment she could string a sentence together, she figured out that being loud and pretty and just the right amount of reckless got her everything she wanted. At 5, she cried because I got a trophy for a spelling bee. At 10, she wore white to my piano recital because it made her feel special. At 16, she lost her virginity to my prom date the night before the dance, and still had the audacity to pout about not getting a corsage. And the worst part? Our parents always looked at me like I was the one being dramatic. Like I should know better. Be the bigger person. Take the high road. Maya's just spirited, Mom would say. You're more grounded, Hannah. Let her have her moment. That phrase, "let her have her moment," became a kind of family slogan. The same way some people say grace before dinner, my mother offered up my milestones on the altar of Maya's need for attention. So when I got engaged to Jake, who, by the way, Maya briefly dated during her sophomore year of college for about 5 minutes before ghosting him, I knew there'd be some friction. I wasn't naive. I expected a few comments, maybe a backhanded compliment about the ring or a jab about me settling down so soon at 35. What I didn't expect was for her to bring her pregnancy announcement to my engagement dinner, of all places. Not some cozy weekend lunch, not a family cookout, but the one night I had carefully planned down to the wine pairings. A private room at Canella's, classy, intimate, expensive. 40 guests. Champagne towers. Custom menus. A jazz trio. And in the middle of my speech, my toast about Jake, about love, about surviving heartbreak and finding the person who feels like home, Maya stands up in a tight emerald dress, flips her hair back, and says, "Actually, can I share something real quick? Just a little surprise for the family." Then she pulls out the ultrasound. Like a magician pulling a rabbit from a hat. Only instead of gasps of disbelief, she gets applause. Applause. For being knocked up. I think that's what burned most, the sound of people clapping. Like her womb had done something heroic. Like she hadn't just hijacked the entire evening. Jake, God bless him, looked completely thrown, and for a second I saw a flash of panic in his eyes, like maybe he'd done the math and wasn't sure he liked the answer. But he caught himself quickly, put his arm around me again, and whispered, "Don't let her get to you." Which is a sweet thought. But impossible. Maya gets to people. That's her gift. That's what she's always done best, worm her way into your plans and make them hers. We cut the cake an hour later. I smiled for the pictures. I thanked the guests. I hugged Maya and said congratulations through my teeth. She hugged me back and whispered in my ear, "Kinda stole the show, huh?" and then giggled like it was some inside joke between sisters. I didn't reply. I didn't slap her. I didn't make a scene. I didn't cry. But I went home. And while Jake fell asleep watching SportsCenter on the couch, I sat in the kitchen, opened my laptop, and started drafting our wedding invites. And this time, I added a surprise of my own. Not a sonogram. Not a speech. Something better. Something final. Something she'd never see coming. And if you're thinking, damn, that's cold, let me ask you something. What would you have done if your sister held a sonogram up during your engagement toast and shouted, "Looks like I win again"? Because trust me, I've spent 30 years being the bigger person. This time, I decided to be the one holding the mic. The truth is, in that moment when the room burst into cheers and polite gasps and congratulatory laughter, all for Maya and her sudden, stunning, so perfectly timed pregnancy, I didn't feel rage, not right away. And I didn't feel the sting of betrayal as sharply as you might expect from someone whose engagement toast had just been upstaged by her own sister's uterus. Instead, what I felt was something older, deeper. Something I hadn't let myself feel in years because it had become so familiar it barely registered anymore. Resignation, that quiet, heavy ache of someone watching an old pattern unfold exactly the way it always has, like pressing play on a movie you've seen a dozen times and hoping, foolishly, that maybe this time the ending will be different, even though you already know every damn line by heart. As I stood there at the center of the restaurant, half smiling through champagne-glazed teeth, still holding my now pointless little toast on a crumpled note card, I wasn't just reacting to the scene in front of me. I was standing knee-deep in decades of Maya doing exactly what Maya does best, which is making everything about her in a way that feels just charming enough for everyone else to let it slide, while leaving just enough venom under the surface to make sure I know it was intentional. She doesn't scream. She doesn't sabotage in loud, theatrical ways. Instead, she takes what's mine with a smile, dressed in designer shoes and wrapped in the language of oops, didn't mean to, but always with eyes that say, of course I did. The earliest memory I have of Maya stealing a moment that wasn't hers goes all the way back to my 8th birthday party, which was Barbie-themed because I was obsessed, and I had spent weeks planning every detail, matching plates, pink balloons, even a homemade cake my mom helped me decorate with edible glitter and a plastic convertible on top. Halfway through the party, right as I was about to blow out the candles, Maya, just barely 6 at the time, started sobbing because her dress was too itchy and insisted on changing into my backup dress, the one I had planned to wear for the second half of the day. Our mother, who always treated Maya's emotional tremors like emergency situations, swooped in and let her do it, cooing, "Let her feel special too, sweetie, there's plenty of pink for everyone." I remember standing there, candle wax dripping, my friends giggling awkwardly as my sister twirled in my second dress like she'd just won a pageant, and I remember thinking, even at that age, this is how it begins. And begin it did. Because that's what Maya has always done, co-opted the spotlight with the practiced grace of someone who knows she'll never be told no. When I got into my first choice college, she got a tattoo the same week, and suddenly the whole family was abuzz with opinions about body autonomy and teen rebellion, and whether it was tasteful or trashy. When I landed my first real job in publishing, she decided to start a blog about raw motherhood and posted a sob story about how hard it was being the less academic sister, even though she hadn't even had a kid yet, and the blog consisted of 2 posts about her dog and a picture of her fridge. And when I finally introduced Jake to our family, Jake, the one man I'd dated who didn't immediately look at Maya like she was the moon, she made a show of saying, "Didn't we hook up once at that Halloween party?" As though that was a cute anecdote and not a goddamn landmine. To her, every celebration I've ever had has been a challenge. A starting pistol. A dare. She doesn't wait her turn, because she never had to. And our parents? They've been feeding the same excuse since the Reagan administration. Maya's just spirited, my dad says, like she's a rescue dog who chews the furniture but loves hard. She doesn't mean anything by it, says my mother, who once told me that I was lucky to be the calm one, as though calm is what you get when you've been silenced your whole life. But the truth is, I haven't been calm. I've just been tired. Tired of being the sister who rolls her eyes and bites her tongue and gets labeled as jealous when I so much as flinch in the face of Maya's tornado behavior. Tired of being told to take the high road so many times I could pave it myself. Tired of showing up, dressing up, smiling through clenched teeth, and pretending that my feelings are some sort of inconvenience that everyone's too polite to acknowledge. So when I watched her lift that ultrasound photo in front of our friends and family, I knew, with chilling clarity, that this wasn't just her big moment, it was her move. A statement. An intentional, strategic ambush designed to remind me and everyone else that no matter what I achieve, no matter how much I plan, no matter how loved I am, she will always find a way to shift the gravity back to herself. It was a checkmate, but not the end of the game. Because what Maya didn't realize, and what she still doesn't, I think, is that over the years, in the quiet corners of every stolen moment, I've been paying attention. Watching. Taking notes. And what I've learned is that the loudest people rarely see it coming when someone like me, someone they think of as harmless, passive, nice, decides they're done playing along. That night, while she basked in applause, I watched the same people who had come to celebrate me lift their glasses to her, and I didn't feel small, or forgotten, or furious. I felt clear. Sharp. Ready. So the next morning, with the sun barely over the horizon and Jake still snoring gently beside me, I slipped out of bed, padded across the hardwood floor, and opened my laptop. I pulled up the wedding invite design that I had finalized just the week before, elegant script, cream and gold, tasteful to the point of boring, and I started editing. Not the date, not the venue, not the dress code, but something else. A small addition. Just one line. And when that new version went out, a few days later, the responses I got weren't polite, weren't routine. They were curious, suspicious, and in some cases, downright alarmed. Because what I added wasn't a sonogram. It was a promise. And Maya, who had spent her life stealing scenes, was about to find out what it felt like to have the whole damn play rewritten behind her back. There's a particular kind of pleasure that comes from doing something subtle enough to be considered tasteful, but sharp enough to cut bone, and when I clicked send on the finalized version of our wedding invitation, the one with just a slight adjustment tucked neatly beneath the RSVP deadline, I felt something unfamiliar stirring in my chest, not vindication yet, not revenge, but the sweet, slow burn of the first domino tipping. For the first time in a very long while, I wasn't the sister reacting to Maya's latest stunt, the daughter making excuses for feeling excluded, or the woman swallowing disappointment so no one else would feel uncomfortable. Instead, I was the one who had just placed a piece on the board that Maya wouldn't notice until the entire game started to collapse around her, and that sensation, that quiet power, was more intoxicating than any toast or ring or compliment I had ever received. The design itself was untouched, the same elegant cream cardstock, the soft gold foil border, the font chosen to balance tradition with modernity, because I knew enough not to announce my intentions too boldly. I wasn't planning to sink to Maya's level, throwing scenes and seeking applause in the middle of someone else's moment. No, what I added was quieter, more refined, more devastating. Just beneath the final line confirming ceremony details and a line requesting dietary preferences, I inserted a single sentence in the same cursive script, so carefully integrated it could have passed as part of the original plan. In celebration of love, truth, and unexpected reunions, this wedding will include a special guest whose existence remained a secret until now. I read it over 3 times, tilting my head, gauging its ambiguity like a wine connoisseur assessing the finish on a particularly dark Cabernet. Then, without further edits, I uploaded the file, sent it to the printer, and hit submit on the digital RSVP site. It took less than 15 minutes for the first text to come in. My cousin Emily, the closest thing I have to a co-conspirator in our family tree of dysfunction, messaged me with a question mark followed by, "What the hell does that mean?" I responded only with a smiley face, which for me, in this context, felt practically scandalous. 10 minutes later, she called, but I ignored it. I wanted the confusion to simmer, wanted the little mystery I had seeded to grow legs and walk straight into the center of every conversation between now and the wedding. By the end of that day, the ripple had spread wider than I expected. My college roommate left a comment on the online guestbook that said, "This just got interesting." A distant aunt emailed me asking if we were adopting. My mother, who had clearly not read the invite all the way through, called to ask if she should wear navy or lilac, and when I casually brought up this special guest, her voice faltered for just a second, long enough to reveal that the gossip machine had already reached her doorstep. But Maya? Maya didn't call. Not right away. No, she waited exactly 36 hours, which I could only assume meant she'd spent at least one of those obsessively dissecting the wording, pacing her kitchen barefoot with that little crease between her eyebrows that she only gets when she knows control is slipping through her fingers. When she finally did call, it wasn't even with a greeting. She launched straight into it, voice tight and sharp around the edges, like she was trying to sound amused, but couldn't quite swallow the panic. "So, what's with the invite? Who's the mystery guest? You're not pregnant, are you?" That would be bold. I let the silence hang just long enough to make her uncomfortable before I replied, my voice smooth and calm like I'd practiced it in the mirror. "Oh, nothing dramatic. Just someone I've been meaning to introduce properly for a long time. You'll meet them at the rehearsal dinner." She laughed, that brittle little giggle she uses when she's not sure if she's being insulted, and then tried to bait me with her usual tactics. "Well, I hope you're not trying to turn the weekend into some soap opera. It's your big day, after all." I'd hate for anything to overshadow it. The irony of her saying that, without a hint of self-awareness, would have been almost admirable if it weren't so grotesque. I simply told her, "Maya, don't worry. I wouldn't dream of upstaging anyone." The truth is, I didn't need to upstage her. I just needed to plant a seed. Because I knew Maya, and I knew that once she felt something was out of her control, once there was even a whisper of a surprise that didn't come from her mouth, she would spiral. She needs to be the orchestrator of chaos, the center of attention, the one who unveils the drama, not the bystander to someone else's plot. And now, for the first time in her life, she had been put in a position where she didn't know something. And it was killing her. Over the next week, I started receiving more messages, most of them from people too polite to ask directly. Some hinted, some speculated, and a few brave souls even suggested they'd heard rumors that Jake had a child from a previous relationship and that maybe we were introducing the baby at the wedding. One woman, a colleague of mine who had only met Maya once, sent a text that said, "I know it's none of my business, but is the special guest her baby?" Followed by, "Wouldn't that be the twist of the decade?" I didn't respond. I didn't have to. The mystery was working. The silence was speaking louder than any sonogram ever could. Jake, for his part, was baffled but supportive. When he finally asked what it meant, I just kissed his cheek and told him, "It's nothing bad. Just something I want to do, for me. Trust me?" And he did. Because Jake, unlike Maya, doesn't thrive on chaos. He doesn't need the world to revolve around him. He's not perfect, no man is, but he's kind and patient, and maybe a little oblivious in the best possible way. And in this case, oblivion was a gift. Maya, though, she didn't let it go. The next time we spoke, her voice was tighter, the curiosity giving way to tension. "Are you trying to send some kind of message?" she asked, her tone now fully peeled of friendliness. "Because if this is about the other night, you're being really immature." I let her words hang in the air, not denying, not confirming, just letting the weight of her own insecurity fold back onto itself like wet fabric. Then I said, simply and clearly, "Maya, if you're that worried, maybe there's a reason." She didn't reply. Not at first. Just that sharp inhale, that intake of breath she takes when she's been hit somewhere soft. Then a clipped "fine," and the line went dead. But I knew then, with perfect certainty, that for the first time, Maya wasn't standing on solid ground. She was guessing, doubting, wondering. And she hated it. Which was perfect. Because uncertainty, when weaponized properly, can be more destructive than any truth. And I hadn't even revealed mine yet. There's a distinct kind of silence that lingers between two people who both know something is coming, something unspoken and unplanned for, something with edges neither one of them can quite see clearly, but sharp enough to draw blood once it lands, and that silence, thick and coiled like wire, followed Maya and me everywhere we went in the days leading up to the wedding. It filled the air at family dinners, whispered behind every congratulations from distant relatives, and hummed like a low current beneath every interaction we had. As if some invisible clock was ticking down between us, and only I knew the exact moment the alarm would go off. And for the first time in our lives, it was Maya who couldn't breathe under it. It started subtly, the way all unravelings do. A quick flash of something unnatural behind her smile, the tremble in her voice when she tried to sound unaffected, and then, like clockwork, her need to regain control surged back to the surface, hungry and relentless. When she called me for the third time in a single afternoon, pretending it was about the seating chart, but immediately pivoting into another attempt to corner me with questions about the so-called special guest, I could hear the desperation she was trying so hard to camouflage with sarcasm. "Look," she said, her voice laced with sugar but cracking at the edges, "I just think it's a little cruel to bait people with some dramatic twist like this. If it's not a big deal, then why all the mystery?" I wanted to tell her that she, of all people, had no business trying to lecture anyone about what's cruel. I wanted to say, "You held up a literal photo of a fetus at my engagement dinner, Maya, like you were cashing in chips at a casino, and I was just the waitress bringing the drinks." But I didn't. Because silence, when deployed precisely, speaks louder than confrontation ever could, and I knew, absolutely knew, that the more I withheld, the more she would spiral. Instead, I kept my voice calm, careful, as if this were any other casual call between sisters, and replied with the kind of quiet cruelty I'd learned only through decades of watching her destroy every room I walked into with a smile. "If you think it's dramatic," I said, pausing just long enough for her to brace herself, "maybe it's because you've gotten so used to being the only one who knows how to steal the show." There was a beat of silence. Then a single laugh, forced, short, empty. "Please," she said, but there was no fight in it, not really, just the tired echoes of someone who knew they were losing ground and didn't have the map to find their way back. And that's when she did something I didn't expect. She broke. Not loudly, not theatrically, not in the way Maya usually performs emotion like a monologue she's been rehearsing in front of a mirror. No. She broke in the way people do when they're afraid they're not the main character anymore. She told me, quietly, like a child sharing a secret in the dark, that she hadn't meant to announce the pregnancy that way. That it hadn't been planned. That she only brought the sonogram because Mom had known about it and suggested she just tell everyone at once so we could all move on. But then the mood felt right and she just did it. "I don't know what I was thinking," she whispered, and I could tell right then that she was lying, not because the words were shaky, but because Maya has never done anything without thinking about how it will land. She doesn't breathe without calculating its effect. But the fact that she was pretending now meant something had shifted. Something fundamental. I asked her then, casually, almost kindly, whether the timing of the pregnancy had ever struck her as interesting. She froze. And then she did what she always does when she's caught between truth and exposure, she deflected. "What's that supposed to mean?" she snapped, and there it was again, that crack in her voice that only appears when the stakes are real. I didn't answer her question. I didn't have to. Because silence, in that moment, was more precise than accusation. I could hear her breathing on the other end, shallow and rapid, like someone searching a dark room for a light switch that's no longer on the wall. And then, almost like she couldn't help herself, she offered me the breadcrumb I never asked for. She said, "You know, Jake and I only slept together that once. It was nothing. Just college." I didn't even remember it until he showed up again at Thanksgiving. And anyway, it's not even possible. The baby isn't his. I did the math. I didn't respond. Because that sentence, those words exactly, meant she had done the math, and the result had scared her enough to rehearse that line over and over in her head until she could say it without stuttering. And that told me everything I needed to know. That night, after I hung up, I opened my laptop again, not to revise the invitations or post cryptic comments on social media, but to finalize something else, something far more surgical. I emailed the photographer with a specific shot list. I contacted the DJ and requested a last-minute change to the song that would play just before the ceremony began. And then I called someone I hadn't spoken to in months, someone whose voice on the other end was both surprised and oddly expectant, like they had always known this call would come eventually. We talked for 22 minutes. We agreed on the logistics. And when I hung up, I didn't feel nervous or conflicted or cruel. I felt ready. Because the thing about people like Maya, people who consume the oxygen in every room, who treat your silence like permission and your patience like weakness, is that they never expect consequences. They expect applause, deference, forgiveness. They expect the story to shift around them like water around a stone, accommodating their chaos, forgiving their offenses, letting them steal whatever light they need without ever paying the bill. But this time, the story wasn't bending. It was breaking. And the only thing left was for her to hear the crack. There are moments in life that don't just unfold, they detonate, shattering the fabric of expectations so violently that the silence left in their wake feels less like peace and more like the stunned ringing in your ears after an explosion. And when I stepped onto the small platform at the front of the garden on the morning of my wedding, my heart calm and hands steady despite the storm of speculation swirling around every single guest in their pressed suits and pastel dresses, I knew without question that we were seconds away from that kind of moment, the kind that doesn't just change the tone of the day, it burns the entire story to the ground. The sun had only just begun to crest over the treetops, casting long shadows over the pale stone path, and the air held that particular kind of hush, not born from reverence or romance, but from the collective tension of people who could feel, in their bones, that something was about to go very wrong. I had waited for this day, not just the ceremony, not just the union with Jake, not just the gathering of friends and family who had flown in from every corner of the country, but this exact moment, the quiet before the revelation, the breath before the scream. And when I glanced to my left and saw Maya seated in the front row, her face pale beneath expertly applied makeup, her fingers drumming softly against the lace hem of her dress in a rhythm that betrayed the frantic pulse she was trying so hard to hide, I felt a stillness settle into my spine, not the stillness of fear or hesitation, but of someone who has arrived at the finish line not breathless or triumphant, but utterly resolved. Jake stood beside me, unaware, blissfully present in the way only someone who had stayed on the outside of our family's tangled web could be, and as the officiant cleared his throat and smiled toward the crowd, preparing to begin the ceremony, I gently raised a hand to interrupt him. "Before we begin," I said, my voice carrying easily in the still morning air, "I have a few words I'd like to say, just something personal, something I've been holding on to, and I think today is the day to let it go." There was a pause, a subtle shift in posture across the rows of seats, heads turning slightly, eyes narrowing in curiosity. I felt Maya's stare before I saw it, sharp and urgent, willing me to stop, to sit back down, to let the story unfold the way it always had around her. But I kept going. You know, people talk a lot about what weddings are supposed to be: romantic, joyful, full of light and laughter, but I think we forget that weddings are also a kind of reckoning, I continued, watching the crowd absorb each word with the kind of attention you only get when truth walks into a room uninvited. They're not just about beginnings, they're about endings too. The end of silence. The end of pretending. The end of letting things slide just to keep the peace. I motioned toward the small screen that had been placed to the right of the altar, a screen the guests had assumed would play a slideshow of Jake and me as children, as a couple, as a safe, expected piece of sentimentality. Instead, with a single nod from me to the coordinator, the screen flickered to life and displayed a dimly lit video taken inside a bar, grainy, but unmistakably clear in its damning content. Maya, seated on a bar stool, hair tied back, laughing as she leaned intimately toward a man who was most definitely not her boyfriend at the time, not her current partner, not anyone in her social circle that my mother would have approved of. He was handsome in a rough, charming sort of way, with a military haircut and that disheveled confidence that comes from knowing he doesn't need to play by anyone's rules. The timestamp in the corner of the footage made everything clear. Just under 14 months ago, just days before Maya had started showing signs of her now-celebrated pregnancy. The video showed them laughing, touching, kissing, then slipping out of frame toward the exit. The entire room had gone so quiet you could hear the fountain trickling in the distance. Maya, to her credit, didn't scream or run. She sat motionless, her jaw slack, her carefully constructed persona collapsing like a paper house under a slow, relentless rain. Then the second clip rolled. A hospital waiting room. A nurse holding a clipboard. The same man from the bar, Lucas, Jake's best friend and former roommate, stepping forward to sign something. Then, in the foreground, a tiny swaddled infant, unmistakably newborn, unmistakably carrying the same cheekbones as the man holding him. Then, the final screen simple, white text on black. Paternity test, confirmed. I didn't look at Maya when the screen went dark. I didn't need to. Her silence was enough. The absence of her voice, the very thing that had always drowned out everyone else, was the loudest sound I'd ever heard. Jake turned toward me, confused, brows furrowed, whispering, "You knew," and I nodded slowly, placing my hand on his and answering, "I knew enough. I knew what needed to be known." I didn't elaborate. There was no need to unravel the entire history in front of our wedding guests. The point had been made. The truth had stepped out of the shadows, not with screaming or revenge, but with quiet certainty, with evidence, with something Maya couldn't interrupt or reframe or twist back into her favor. And still, we got married. Right there, in front of the stunned crowd, in front of the woman who had spent her life turning every room into her own private theater, we said our vows. I looked Jake in the eyes, knowing that while our path forward wouldn't be without its own challenges, no marriage ever is, it would be free of the one person who had always tried to write herself into the center of my story. The applause, when it came, was hesitant at first, but it grew, slowly, like people weren't sure if clapping was the appropriate response to what they'd just witnessed. Maya didn't stay for the reception. She stood, pale and glassy-eyed, walked past me without a word, and disappeared into the parking lot. No screaming, no scene, no final performance. Just silence. In the weeks that followed, the family splintered in the quiet, private way that families often do after a truth too big to ignore rips through the middle. Some blamed me. Some thanked me. Most stayed uncomfortably quiet. And Maya? She posted a cryptic quote about being betrayed by the people closest to you and hasn't called since. But the funny thing is, I don't feel like I won. I don't feel triumphant or victorious. What I feel is something slower, heavier, more difficult to name. Because when someone like Maya falls, it doesn't feel like justice. It feels like finally dropping a weight you didn't know you were carrying your entire life. And maybe that's the real twist, not that Maya's baby wasn't her boyfriend's, not that she tried to hijack my wedding, not that I found a way to take the microphone back, but that after everything, I didn't feel better. I just felt done. And sometimes, being done is the most powerful ending there is.